I used to believe that marriage was built on small, ordinary moments: the morning coffee, the quiet dinners, the walks in the park when the leaves turned gold in autumn. But sometimes, it takes just one of those moments to unravel everything, to reveal the cracks you've been trying not to see. That morning, in our small apartment in Lyon, I realized my marriage had been crumbling for far longer than I wanted to admit. The kitchen was dim, the blinds half drawn against the winter light. My shift at the hospital had ended only an hour before, and I hadn't even changed out of my pale blue scrubs. My hair smelled faintly of antiseptic, my hands were cracked from soap, and my eyes ached from another sleepless night. Mark, my husband, sat at the table, tapping his fingers impatiently against his mug of coffee. "Claire," he said, his voice low but sharp, "I need your credit card." It wasn't the first time. I had learned long ago that when he said need, it rarely meant groceries or bills. It meant gambling, online purchases, things that vanished into thin air with no explanation. Each time, he swore it was the last. Each time, I believed him, or at least pretended to. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Mark, we talked about this. I can't." "You promised, Claire." His voice cut through the kitchen like glass shattering. "Don't start this again. Just give me the card. You don't understand." I looked at him. The man I had married 20 years ago. The man I once thought I would grow old with. His dark hair was streaked with gray now, his face lined with age and bitterness. But what hurt wasn't the change in his looks, it was the change in his eyes. They no longer looked at me as a partner, but as an obstacle. "No," I whispered, softer than I intended. For a second, there was silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest, that makes every sound outside feel magnified: the hum of a car engine, the muffled laughter of children walking to school, the church bells striking 8. Life was moving forward, ordinary and simple, while inside our home, something irreversible was about to happen. Then it came. Mark's hand tightened around his mug, his jaw set, and with one sudden movement, he hurled the coffee across the room. The mug shattered against the counter, the hot liquid splashing across the white tiles, dripping down the cabinet doors, seeping into the cracks of the floor. The bitter smell filled the air instantly, clinging to my clothes, my skin. I didn't flinch, not because I wasn't shocked, but because something inside me had already broken long before that moment. The sting wasn't on my skin, it was in my chest, because I knew that this wasn't about a credit card. It wasn't about money. It was about control. I stood there, motionless, as Mark's breathing grew heavier. His eyes darted from me to the coffee dripping onto the floor, then back again. "See what you made me do," he said, his voice trembling with anger. But I hadn't made him do anything. This was who he had become. Or maybe this was who he had always been, and I had been too blind or too hopeful to see it. As I grabbed a towel and bent down to clean the mess, I caught my reflection in the oven door, pale, exhausted, hair pulled back loosely, wrinkles forming where laughter lines used to be. A woman who once dreamed of love, of family, of safety. A woman who now spent her nights saving strangers at the hospital, only to come home to a man who destroyed her piece by piece. And yet, despite it all, I kept thinking, what if this time he really changes? That's the cruelest part of it. Hope doesn't leave easily. It lingers, even when it hurts. But that morning, with coffee dripping from the counter and Mark glaring at me like an enemy, I felt something shift inside me. Not strength, not yet. Just the first crack of doubt. The thought that maybe, just maybe, I deserved more than this. I didn't know it then. But the truth behind his demand for my card would unravel everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and even myself. After the coffee incident, the kitchen stayed quiet for a long time. Mark didn't apologize, not really. He mumbled something about being stressed, about me not understanding the pressure he was under. I wiped the tiles in silence, the rag turning brown with coffee stains, and told myself what I had told myself 100 times before. Keep the peace, Claire. Don't make it worse. But peace had become a stranger in our home. That night, as I walked the hospital halls on my second shift, I found myself drifting back to the early years of our marriage. We had met in Marseille, where I grew up. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, and he was the charming salesman who could make anyone laugh. I still remember the way he held my hand when we first walked along the old port, the smell of salt in the air, the lanterns flickering against the water. Back then, Mark was gentle. Or at least, he knew how to appear gentle. He brought me flowers on Tuesdays, just because. He listened when I talked about my patients, even though he didn't really understand. My parents adored him, saying he was ambitious, strong, the kind of man who would take care of you, and for a while, it seemed true. We bought our first apartment together, small but bright. We hosted dinners where Mark cooked pasta and told stories, making everyone laugh. I thought I was safe, but slowly, things changed. The flowers stopped, the laughter dulled, the dinners turned into arguments about money, or rather, about my money. Mark had a way of making his failures invisible and mine unbearable. If I worked extra shifts, he said I was neglecting him. If I refused, he said I wasn't pulling my weight. There was no winning, and the money, it slipped away. Credit cards maxed out, promises to pay it back that never came true. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, his business ventures not working out, but soon, I realized there was more to it. He was hiding things. I remember one evening, about 3 years into our marriage, when I found a receipt tucked into his jacket pocket, a large withdrawal from an ATM in Monaco. When I asked him, he smiled too icily. I was just helping a friend, he said. Don't worry about it. But the worry never left me. Now, years later, as I walked the sterile hospital corridor, with its humming lights and faint smell of bleach, those memories pressed on me. The way Mark's face had changed when I said no that morning, the anger, the desperation. Something was wrong. When I came home that night, the apartment was dark. Mark was in bed, snoring heavily, an empty glass of whiskey on the nightstand. I tiptoed into the kitchen and opened a drawer where I usually kept my credit cards. The slot was empty. My heart thudded. He had taken it anyway. The betrayal wasn't new, but this time, something inside me hardened. I went back to the bedroom and stared at him, lying there peacefully, as though nothing had happened. His face looked softer in sleep, almost like the man I once loved. But I couldn't let myself be fooled anymore, because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money. He was hiding something from me, something big enough to risk everything for, and I was determined to find out what it was. The morning after I discovered my card missing, I moved like a ghost through the apartment. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee from the day before, though I had scrubbed the tiles until my hands were raw. Mark left early, not even bothering with an excuse. I watched from the window as he disappeared down the street, his shoulders hunched, his steps quick. For the first time in years, I didn't just swallow the lie. I needed answers. I pulled out my phone and opened the bank app, my heart thudding against my ribs. The balance was lower than I feared. Several withdrawals had been made overnight, each at different ATMs across the city. I scrolled further, my throat tightening. There were charges I didn't recognize, restaurants I'd never been to, payments to shops I hadn't entered, even a jewelry store. My chest ached. Jewelry? For who? I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, the numbers blurring before my eyes. Memories began to stir of his late nights out, of the way he'd silence his phone when I entered the room, of the scent of perfume once clinging faintly to his jacket that was not mine. But I didn't want to believe it, not yet. Instead, I told myself it could still be business. Maybe he was meeting someone. Maybe it was stress. Maybe. But even as the excuses formed, my gut whispered the truth. Something was cracking in the story Mark had woven around us. Later that week, while he was in the shower, I slipped into the drawer of his desk. He always kept it locked, but I had learned long ago that Mark wasn't careful when he drank. The key had been left out, tossed carelessly beside a half-empty bottle of scotch. Inside, the drawer was messier than I expected. Crumpled papers, unopened bills, a few old photographs. But one envelope caught my eye. It was thin, cream-colored, with handwriting I didn't recognize. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated nearly a year earlier. The words were short, but sharp, written in French with a neat hand. Mark, I cannot wait forever. You made promises. If you don't give me what I'm owed soon, your wife will know everything. No signature. My body went cold. I folded the paper back into the envelope with shaking hands, my mind racing. Who was this person? What promises? What did he owe, and what exactly was I not supposed to know? I replaced everything carefully and shut the drawer, slipping the key back exactly where I had found it. Mark was still in the shower, humming faintly to himself, as though our life wasn't dangling by threads I hadn't seen until now. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was steady, almost peaceful, while my heart hammered in my chest. The letter burned in my memory. The coffee cup had been the first explosion, but this was the crack in the wall, the beginning of something far larger, something darker. And for the first time, I began to wonder if the man I had married was not just broken, but dangerous. It started with a lie so small, I almost let it pass. Mark told me he had a late meeting downtown, something about clients, something about contracts. He didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. That was the moment I decided I couldn't live on suspicions and unanswered questions anymore. I needed to see for myself. The night air in Lyon was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. I waited 10 minutes after he left, then slipped out too, pulling my coat tight around me. The streets glistened with the residue of an earlier drizzle, neon lights reflecting on the wet pavement. My shoes tapped quietly against the cobblestones. As I followed at a distance, my heart racing with every step. Mark walked quickly, as though he knew time wasn't on his side. He cut through narrow streets, past shuttered bakeries and closed cafes, until he finally stopped outside a small bar near the river. It was the kind of place I never would have noticed, dimly lit, with chipped paint on the sign, and a door that looked like it had absorbed 100 arguments. I pressed myself against the wall across the street, peering through the cracked glass as he went inside. My stomach turned when I saw him sit at a table in the corner, not alone. A woman joined him. She was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled neatly into a bun and a red scarf around her neck. She leaned forward as she spoke, her face tense, her hands restless. Mark looked different with her, alert, almost defensive, like a man backed into a corner. They spoke quickly, their words lost under the hum of the bar. At one point, she pulled something from her bag and slid it across the table. Mark's hand hesitated before taking it. My eyes strained, desperate to see what it was, but all I caught was the faint glint of paper. A document, maybe. I clenched my fists. Every part of me wanted to storm in, demand answers, demand the truth, but something stopped me. The letter I had found, the way she leaned in, her voice sharp, her finger tapping the table as though making threats. This wasn't just an affair. It was something else. Mark finally stood, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the door, as if afraid of being seen. He didn't notice me in the shadows. The woman stayed behind, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her drink. I waited until Mark disappeared down the street before crossing over. I pulled the door open, my legs unsteady, my pulse roaring in my ears. The woman looked up at me when I entered, her eyes widening in recognition, though we had never met. "Madame," she whispered, almost under her breath, her French laced with urgency. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, caught between fear and anger, confusion and the aching need for truth. And in that instant, I knew my husband's secret was bigger than anything I had dared imagine. The woman's eyes lingered on mine, sharp and searching, as if she expected me to turn and run, but I didn't. I stepped closer, my hands trembling, though I tried to steady them against the edge of the table. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the door Mark had just walked through, then back to me. For a moment, she seemed torn between caution and pity. Finally, she sighed, motioned to the empty chair across from her, and said, "Sit." I lowered myself into the chair, the wood creaking under me. The bar was noisy enough that no one cared about two women speaking in hushed voices, but I felt exposed, as though every eye in the room was on us. "My name is Isabel," she began. "I've known Mark for some time, longer than you think." Her words sliced through me, sharp and deliberate. I tried to mask the sting, but my lips quivered. "Are you his mistress?" The question came out before I could stop it, heavy with dread. Her expression tightened, but she shook her head. "No, not like that. I didn't come here for romance." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Mark owes me. He owes me more than he can ever repay." I blinked, confused. "Owes you money?" Her lips curved in something between a smile and a grimace. "Money, promises, lies." She tapped the glass in front of her. "Your husband, madame, has built himself a life on borrowed things, borrowed time, borrowed trust. He thinks he can keep every secret buried, but one day, the ground gives way." The letter, the words echoed in my head. "You made promises. If you don't give me what I'm owed soon, your wife will know everything." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean, secrets? What is it he's hiding?" Isabel's eyes softened, just slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not an enemy but another woman caught in Mark's storm. That is not mine to tell, not all of it, but I will say this: the man you think you know, the one who comes home tired, who sighs about bills, who pretends to carry the world on his shoulders, he wears masks, many masks. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table. Be careful, madame. Sometimes knowing the truth does not set you free. It only makes the cage visible. I leaned back, stunned, my breath shallow. The air in the bar felt suddenly thick, pressing against my lungs. Before I could respond, Isabel stood. She adjusted her red scarf, placed a few coins on the table, and looked at me one last time. "Protect yourself," she whispered. "And your daughter?" Then she was gone, swallowed by the night outside. I sat frozen, my mind racing. Protect myself. Protect my daughter. From Mark? From the man I had shared my life, my bed, my future with. I wanted to believe she was lying, that this was some cruel game. But deep down, something told me she wasn't. Deep down, I knew she had only shown me the edge of the storm, and the worst of it was still to come. That night, when I returned home, Mark was already in bed. He stirred when I entered the bedroom, mumbling something about work. His arm reached lazily for me, but I recoiled, my body stiff. I lay down beside him, wide awake, replaying Isabel's words over and over. Borrowed trust, many masks, protect yourself. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt afraid. The following days felt like walking through a house I no longer recognized. The furniture was the same, the walls still painted a pale cream. The clock in the hallway still ticked in its steady rhythm, but beneath it all, something had shifted. Every look Mark gave me, every word he spoke, felt layered with something I couldn't yet see. A lie, a mask, a danger waiting to be unwrapped. I became a stranger in my own home, watching him as though through glass. He ate his breakfast, buttered his bread, scrolled on his phone, but I noticed the tiny tells now. The way his eyes flickered toward me, measuring whether I had found anything. The way his shoulders stiffened whenever the phone rang. And then there was Emma. Our daughter was 17. Bright, restless, always on the edge of adulthood. She adored her father. She always had. And I couldn't shake Isabel's warning, "Protect your daughter." One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen. Emma's laughter filled the air, the kind that usually made me smile. But that night it made my chest ache. "Papa, you promised, remember? You said you'd help me get the money for the summer course in Florence." My heart froze. "Money again?" Mark chuckled, his voice warm, reassuring, almost too reassuring. "Of course, my little bird. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Emma squealed, kissed his cheek, and ran upstairs. I stood hidden by the doorway, my nails digging into my palms. We could barely cover rent some months. I knew exactly how fragile our accounts were. So where would he find that money? That night, when Mark fell asleep, I slipped from bed and crept to his office. His laptop was locked, of course, but his desk drawers, the bottom drawer, resisted. But after some fumbling, I found the spare key taped beneath the tabletop. Inside, I discovered folders, contracts, bank statements, receipts. My hand shook as I flipped through them, and then I saw it. Transfers, large amounts moving between accounts I had never seen before. Names I didn't recognize, some in Paris, others in Marseille. The sums were staggering, thousands upon thousands, shuffling back and forth like pieces on a chessboard. At the bottom of the pile, tucked away as though forgotten, was another envelope. I pulled it out, my breath catching when I recognized the handwriting, the same as the letter I had found before. I opened it, and my eyes blurred as I read, "Mark, this is your last chance. If you don't pay, she will know. She will know everything. And it won't just be your wife. Your daughter is old enough now. She deserves to know the truth about you." The room spun. My knees weakened, and I had to clutch the desk to keep from collapsing. What truth? What could he possibly be hiding that someone would use Emma as leverage? I slipped the envelope back into place before Mark stirred upstairs. But that night, I barely closed my eyes. Isabel's voice rang in my head, "Protect yourself, and your daughter." By dawn, I had decided I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The walls of our home were cracking, and if I didn't act soon, they would collapse on both me and Emma. By the third morning of sleepless nights, I could no longer hold it inside. The letter, the transfers, Isabel's warning. They pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't carry any longer. Mark was in the kitchen when I walked in. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and bitter, the sound of the kettle hissing. He glanced at me, smiling, as though nothing were wrong. "Morning, Claire," he said softly, his voice smooth. "Did you sleep?" The lie slipped so easily from his lips, as though he didn't notice the shadows under my eyes. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat at the table, folding my hands together to keep them from shaking. "We need to talk," I said. The words hung in the air like smoke. His movements slowed. He placed the cup on the counter, but he didn't pour. He turned to me, his smile fading just enough to reveal the tension beneath. "About what?" he asked, though his eyes already told me he knew. I took a deep breath. "The letters, the accounts, the transfers, Isabel." His jaw clenched. For the first time, the mask slipped, not fully, but enough for me to see a flicker of something darker beneath: fear, anger, calculation. He walked toward me slowly, deliberately, then leaned on the table across from me. His face was close to mine, his voice low and sharp. "You've been going through my things." I refused to flinch. "You've been lying to me, to Emma, to all of us." His hand tightened on the edge of the table. "You don't understand, then make me understand," I snapped, my voice breaking. "What is it, Mark? What is it you're hiding that's worth all this secrecy, worth risking your family?" For a moment, I thought he might actually answer. His lips parted, his eyes flickered, and I saw the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. But just as quickly, he shut it away. The mask slid back into place. "This isn't your concern," he said coldly. My chest ached. "Not my concern. I'm your wife. Emma is your daughter. If something touches us, it is my concern." His voice rose, louder than I had ever heard it. "Stay out of it, Claire." I froze. His outburst echoed through the kitchen, rattling the fragile silence. For a long moment, we stared at each other, strangers across a gulf I didn't know how to cross. Then his voice lowered again, almost pleading. "Please, don't dig into this, for your sake, and for hers." Emma's footsteps creaked above us. Mark straightened quickly, plastering on the easy smile he wore so well, as though nothing had happened. But I sat there, stunned, my heart pounding. He had chosen silence. He had chosen secrecy over honesty, control over trust. And in that moment, I understood whatever truth Mark was hiding. It wasn't just about debts or money. It was something bigger, something that had the power to destroy us all. After that morning, something in me hardened. Mark had drawn a line in the sand, refusing to let me cross, but I could no longer sit quietly on my side. If he wouldn't tell me the truth, then I would find it myself. I began quietly digging into his past. It wasn't easy. Mark was careful, and the image he had built of himself, the charming, reliable man, the devoted father, was polished to perfection. But cracks began to show once I looked closely enough. I went first to the town hall, pretending I needed documents for Emma's upcoming course application. While the clerk shuffled through papers, I asked casually if she could also check Mark's file. When she handed me the folder, my hands trembled. His birth certificate, his old addresses, his records. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed gaps, whole years unaccounted for. Between his late 20s and mid-30s, Mark had no official residence in France, no work records, no tax records, nothing, as though he had simply vanished for nearly 8 years. And then, suddenly, he reappeared here, in our small town, with a new job, a new identity, polished, clean, as though he had sprung from thin air. I walked out of the town hall with the folder burned into my memory, my heart racing. That night, while Mark was out meeting an old colleague, I dug deeper. The accounts, the letters, the fragments I had stolen glances at, they began to form a map in my head. Names repeated across the transfers. One stood out, Argouthia. It nagged at me, until I finally searched online. My breath caught when the first article appeared. Richard Gouthia, sentenced for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, connected to an extensive network across France and Italy. Associates remain unidentified. My mouth went dry. I clicked through page after page. The trial had made headlines. Millions of euros vanished. Families ruined. And though some associates had been arrested, others had never been named publicly. And then, buried in one article, a single line stopped my heart. Several witnesses described a man, known only as M, who coordinated transfers and acted as Gauthia's right hand, before disappearing abroad in the early 2000s. Mark. The room spun around me. My husband, the man I had trusted, the father of my child, wasn't just hiding debts. He was hiding a past soaked in crime. I felt sick, clutching my stomach as the weight of it crashed down. And worse, Isabel's words now screamed in my head. Protect yourself. Protect your daughter. Mark wasn't just lying. He wasn't just in debt. He was still tied to that world, and someone out there wanted to drag him, and us, back into it. The sound of the door unlocking jolted me from my thoughts. Mark stepped inside, humming lightly, carrying a bottle of wine. He looked so ordinary, so harmless, but I knew now, and I could never unknow it. Sleep became impossible after that night. I lay awake listening to Mark's breathing beside me, steady and calm, while my own heart thudded like a drum in my chest. Every time he turned in his sleep, I jolted, afraid he could somehow read the knowledge in my eyes. For days, I carried the truth like a stone inside me. I smiled when Emma was near, cooked dinner, folded laundry, answered neighbors' questions with practiced warmth, but inside, I was unraveling. I began quietly setting things aside. Emma's passport, a small envelope of cash I withdrew in careful amounts so Mark wouldn't notice. Documents tucked into the bottom drawer of my wardrobe, beneath scarves he never touched. It felt paranoid, dramatic even, but Isabel's warning replayed in my mind. Protect your daughter. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront him again. Not yet, not until I knew what it would cost. That moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Wednesday evening. Emma was upstairs studying when Mark came home, his face pale, his hands shaking. He poured himself a drink before even taking off his coat. I watched him carefully. What's wrong? He didn't answer at first. He downed half the glass, then set it down with a thud. His eyes met mine, full of a strange, restless panic. They're coming, he said. My stomach twisted. Who? He hesitated, then shook his head. It doesn't matter. Just trust me, Claire. We'll be fine if you do as I say. My pulse raced. His words confirmed everything. The past hadn't stayed buried. It was clawing its way back into our lives. I stood slowly, steadying my voice. And if I don't just follow blindly anymore. His expression hardened, though fear still flickered beneath. Then you put us all in danger. Me, Emma, yourself. I wanted to scream, to tell him he had put us in danger years ago with his choices, his lies. But Emma's footsteps above stopped me. The thought of her hearing us, of her being pulled into this darkness, silenced my anger. Instead, I nodded faintly, pretending to yield, but inside a decision was forming. That night, when Mark finally collapsed into uneasy sleep, I sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. The lampposts cast their tired glow, the bakery across the square already dark, the shutters closed tight on every home. Ordinary lives, untouched by secrets and threats. And I knew then, I couldn't let Emma's future be swallowed by Mark's past. I would protect her, even if it meant walking away from the man I had once believed was my safe harbor. Even if it meant betraying him before he could betray us again. The next day, I told Emma we needed to visit her Aunt Isabel for the weekend. She frowned, suspicious. Why? Papa said we'd all go out for dinner Friday. I forced a smile. Plans changed. It's just for a couple of days. Pack your things. She didn't argue further, though I could see the questions forming in her eyes. She had always been perceptive, my Emma. Too perceptive for her age. Mark returned earlier than expected that evening. I was in the kitchen, folding Emma's scarf into her bag, when I heard the door slam. His footsteps were sharp, uneven. Claire, he called, his voice edged with anger. I swallowed, stepped into the hall. You're home early. He held a crumpled envelope in his hand. I recognized it instantly, one of the ones I had tucked away. He must have found my hiding place. What is this? His voice shook. Are you planning to run? Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed, frozen. I felt my body lock, then soften. There was no point in hiding anymore. Yes, I said, steadying my voice. I was going to take Emma, to keep her safe. The silence that followed was heavy, unbearable. Mark's face crumpled, not with rage, but something far more desperate. I did it for you, he whispered. Everything I did, everything I hid. It was to give us a better life. I thought I could outrun it. I thought I could bury it. His hands trembled as he held the envelope. But it follows me everywhere. Emma's voice cut through, small but sharp. What did you do, Papa? He looked at her then, and I knew he saw the final thread, snapping the last fragile strand of her trust. His lips parted, but no words came. I stepped forward, placing myself between them. My voice was calm, but it carried all the strength I had left. You chose this life, Mark. You chose lies, secrets, and shadows. Emma and I, we choose something else. We choose peace. For a long moment, he simply stared at us, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning. Then, without a word, he dropped the envelope, turned, and walked out into the night. We never saw him again. The following weeks were a blur of police visits, endless questions, whispers in the market. His name appeared again in newspapers, tied to investigations that reached across borders. But by then, Emma and I were already gone, living quietly with Isabel, building a new life from the ashes. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the slam of that door. I still see Mark's face, the desperation, the guilt, the love tangled with lies. But more than that, I see Emma's eyes the moment she realized the truth. Eyes that no longer looked at her father as a hero, but as a stranger. And that is the cruelest betrayal of all. Not the lies themselves, but the way they steal innocence, the way they shatter the foundations of love. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Stories like mine are not easy to tell, but they are real. They happen behind closed doors in quiet towns, to families who look ordinary from the outside. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have stayed silent, protecting the illusion of family? Or would you have walked away, like I did, to save your child from living in the shadows of someone else's sins? If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to my stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. Stories that remind us we are not alone in our struggles, no matter how heavy they feel.